With that, everybody, appreciate you joining today. More people will be joining. This is a recorded event that we will post online. I want to welcome Congressman Andy Biggs and Caitlin Ward. Congressman, thanks for your willingness to do this. And Glenn, why don't you give our special guest a proper introduction?
Well, we're thrilled to have Congressman Biggs with us today, and this is going to be a special pseudo live episode of social distancing. It's the first time we've done it with other people. Congressman, we had a chamber call maybe 2 months ago with you, and it feels like 20 years ago, the way time is moving today on the pandemic. And first, we want to just say we appreciate all of your hard work in Washington, D.C. to advance the state of Arizona and to keep the country going during this difficult time. And you were an extraordinary leader when you served in the Arizona legislature. When we look at a lot of the reasons why the state before the pandemic was really the top economy in the country, and why we expect we will be when we get to the other side of this, it's because of a lot of your work, particularly when you led the state Senate. So, Congressman Biggs, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks, Glenn. So you want me to go ahead, Garrick and Glenn? You ready for me to?
We'd love for you to start with the spiel, and then we'll, if it's all right, we'll ask a few questions.
I have a spiel. Thank you. It's good to be with all of you, and I wish we were all together in person. I know that anytime you speak, you really like to see the response, to see if anybody's going to sleep, or if they've, in these Zoom meetings, if they've muted themselves and taken the guitar off the back of the wall and started practicing the guitar or something. You never know, but I'm delighted to be with you, and thanks, Glenn. You've been a great friend over the years. I appreciate that. And part of my spiel is to just talk about what 2020 has been like. I think you're right. It seems forever ago that we got together, but most people that I talk to on these Zoom calls, they forget that in January we were in the middle of an impeachment trial in the United States Senate. I mean, that was just a few months ago, and at the same time that was going on, we had this incredibly robust economy going on, and Arizona was really at the forefront of that. And it was fantastic to see everything that's happening in this state. And then we moved from the impeachment issue to the first cases really hitting America and Arizona. People forget this. We had one of the first 5 cases of coronavirus in Arizona. It was in Tempe. And so we have that little bit of notoriety there, but we moved into within, I don't know if you remember this, but the CDC and the president, they provided some advice and guidance, and within a week, our economy basically ground to a halt. And over the last few months, over the next few months, we had over 40 million people go on unemployment, lose their jobs. And the last 2 months, we've started to see jobs come back at a rate far higher than many would have thought possible. And so I just want to say that one of the things I think is important is that the economic foundation is still solid. We just have to have an opportunity to let it work. And if we do, then I think the foundation is there. We can actually make it better as far as regulatory and tax environment, which I think we need to do. So this is what 2020 has been like, and we keep going. We've had the last 6 weeks social unrest and rioting in different places. So the 2020 has been a year that really, I think, people in the future will look back and say it was a fulcrum year. It really, a lot of things were decided in 2020 that will have long-lasting, perhaps maybe not generational, but certainly very long-lasting impact. So Congress responded with 3 bills, and the first bill that came out was pretty quick, and the president asked for $2.5 billion. My colleagues across the aisle immediately took it up to around $14 billion, and then they, without rhyme or reason, they just kind of, you know how it is, they worked themselves back to 8.5 billion. And then the next bill, which was about a week and a half, 10 days later, when we contacted the Congressional Budget Office, they said it will cost a minimum of 150 billion, but since there was no cap, it's impossible to say how much that bill was going to cost. And then the third bill was roughly 2.2 to 2.5 trillion dollars, depending on who's calculating. So you see that immediately there was an influx of about $3 trillion in various ways. And then you also had Federal Reserve Authority given for $4 trillion roughly. And so the reason I say that is because I think contextually we have to look at that as because of some of the things I'm going to talk about in a minute. When we had the robust economy, we had $1 trillion structural deficit already projected for this year. And now that structural deficit is going to be north of $4 trillion and could be as high as $8 trillion, depending on whose bill comes out in the next couple of weeks. And that leads me to what I'm going to talk about now, what's happening with the coronavirus relief package that's sitting there. The Speaker Pelosi has basically said we're not leaving, the House will not leave without a coronavirus relief package. We go back in session Monday. That bill is not scheduled in the House or the Senate currently. The Senate will be in the first week of August. I anticipate we're going to be added on as well the first week of August. And I would imagine that is when you'll see this coronavirus relief package. And I'll talk about that for a second. The House version of that, which was a strict party line vote, is $3.2 trillion on the part of, that's what the Speaker's bill looks like. It extends the unemployment compensation benefits package. And I don't know what you're getting, but I get from a lot of businesses when I talk to them, they say, please end that because we can bring back employees. They don't want to come back because they're getting a $600 bonus on a weekly basis from the feds. So please end that. And her package would take that into next spring and actually would, in some instances, increase that unemployment package. The problem is this is generational wealth transfer. I mean, you really, when you start moving to $28-30 trillion, you are actually at that point well above if you take the total national debt and compare it to our total gross domestic product, total economy, you start moving into a the debt to revenue ratio that's probably 110 to 112%, maybe even higher depending on who's doing the calculating. That is a dangerous, dangerous place to be, and so we have to start worrying about a sovereign debt crisis. And one of the things that helps the United States is that we are the international currency of exchange. That's important to us. We need to stay there, and we could go into China and what's happening to them. They really wanted to become that. They can't really get to the regional currency of exchange even right now because they're having troubles of their own economically. Also large part driven by the coronavirus. One of the issues that I introduced, I think we talked about a couple months ago, was the liability protection bill that I had introduced. Liability protection remains for me a very important issue, and one of the things that we've tried to convey to the Senate is, please don't trade off $2 trillion of debt for a weak sauce liability protection issue. And I've talked with some of the senators who are my friends and expressed that they agree. Mitch McConnell is of course the majority leader in the Senate. It's hard to say where he is. He is committed to doing a liability protection bill, but right now it's being effectively filibustered, so he can't get there because it's being held up by the other side, who they're waiting to see what they're going to do in the phase 4 relief package. So that's what's going on there. Other things that I think are important is the payroll tax relief, which is very important to the president. I've talked to some economists to get their opinion on it. They agree. I agree. I'm sold on it. I think that is a tremendous stimulative effect with very manageable cost, and so he wants that badly in this next relief package, as do I. What I don't share is the administration is also seeking to do another round of direct payments. What that would look like, I'm not sure. The Democrats have indicated they want direct payments, but they want everything from $2,000 a month for every American until GDP gets back to where it was pre-COVID. I don't think if you were to start doing that, I don't know that you'd get GDP back to where it would be pre-COVID. But that is one of the proposals that's on the table. And that's every American, not even based on your income. That's just every American. And the president is talking about a direct payment of $1,200 a person again. We don't know. I've talked to economists. Has that worked? Can you give us data to show that was helpful or not? They said there's no. We don't have any data to determine whether that helped or did not help. But I have to ask those questions and find out as we look at this. So what's happening right now on the relief package bill is, like I say, it's in abeyance. It passed out of the House on a party line vote, and it's just sitting there. I'm not even sure it's been transmitted to the Senate yet. And the Senate is indicated they're not going to touch that. It is DOA if she gives it to them. And so that's what's going on. And Mitch McConnell right now has made the primary goal liability protection, which I think is entirely appropriate. Other bills. So we're going back in next week. So we're really going to be tackling appropriation bills next week. The first one will be the NDA, or the Defense Appropriations Bill. That is going through Rules Committee tomorrow, as my understanding. And as always, you'll see hundreds of amendments offered. I'm offering, I think it's 6, Kate, something like 6. Yeah. So we'll see how those fly. And there's a whole series of bills. One of the bills, and they're all filled with these trade-offs, as you know. Those of you who've been observers or like Glenn have worked there, and some of the others that have worked there, they're filled with trade-offs. And so we'll have to see how that goes. But just so you know, there are spending caps in place, and the proposed appropriation bills have already blown through those spending caps. They're not even talking about staying within those spending caps. And this takes me back to where I started the conversation of national debt and hazards of national debt. And that hazard right now is this. If we didn't spend another dime, we would have a national debt of somewhere north of $28 trillion by September 30th of this year. That's if we didn't spend anything else. But this notion that we're going to go out and, oh, by the way, the relief package is already at I think it's already hit 2 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, Kate, something like that. Pretty high up there, pretty close to 2 trillion. That is without the rest of the body even being able to negotiate on it. That's with leadership negotiating with each other. And so if that happens, you could be pushing $30 trillion by September, and that's a bit of a problem. So let's just remember that. Other practical matters that I'm asked about will there be another round of PPP? There's still money in PPP. There's certainly money in the EIDL program. There's lots of money in both those programs, but PPP will run out of money eventually. There was money in the Democrat bill for some PPP expansion, and I think there is interest in the Senate on that. So we'll see how that plays out. My understanding is that is a component of that the leadership is negotiating right now. So I would say you would probably see some PPP, additional PPP action in there. I think they'll put some tighter restrictions, so it would go to small business as opposed to being available to other larger businesses. So with that, I think we've kind of hit on a number of issues, and I'm happy to take questions. Glenn, is that appropriate? We're going to take some questions. Garrick?
That would be great, Congressman. And thank you for those comments. That's I appreciate that you're balancing out all of these different issues, including our soaring national debt and $30 trillion. That's I'd say that's a lot of shekels. My first question is, you touched a little bit, we take a look at the opportunities coming out of this. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement just went into effect. You were a supporter of that. Arizona played a critical role. We look at that as a really incredible opportunity, given that it seems supply chains are going to be migrating from this direction with all of the issues going on with China. Just wanted to sort of get your thoughts on what you think for Arizona the opportunities may be, and just where you think things stand with China and how that's going to directly impact Arizona's economy.
Great, good questions. I'm going to take, in my opinion, you gave me a compound question, Glenn. I see 3 different areas that I need to touch on. So first of all is the USMCA. I think that is really going to be instrumental in helping the economy rebound quickly. I think not just for Arizona, but for the entire country. And I think Arizona is a direct beneficiary of that. And I think that's really positive. And I think both the government of Mexico and the U.S. right now trying to get a handle on the COVID cases and how to deal with that issue, especially since in Arizona we've got we got 3 hot spots. One's Santa Cruz County, one's Yuma County, and that's where we have our 2 biggest ports of entry. And it looks like, according to, oddly enough, CNN reports that I was looking at 2 or 3 weeks ago, looks like we're getting some of that cross-border COVID traffic as well. And I think both sides are trying to get a handle on that. But I think that it's really important, because I think that trade perspective is going to be very helpful and hopefully help this economy rebound more quickly. Supply chains. I want to talk about supply chains for a second, because I think you're right. I think you're going to see some supply chains come back to the U.S. They're going to come back to this hemisphere as well. They may not all come back to the U.S., but I think you're going to see some dotting the hemisphere, and some may be going to some Southeast Asian countries as well. So we'll get some back. We won't get everything back. The way you get everything back is when there's a movement. We need to make sure that we're attractive enough, and that requires at least 3 things. We need to make sure that our tax structure is good enough, so that the overall cost structure is strong enough and provides that it works out on the balance sheet for a company to bring it back here. And that includes regulatory impacts as well. And I think the third thing is to make sure that we have a workforce that's at least trainable and available. And I think with where we sit now, well in excess of 20 million people unemployed, I think that we can answer the call on all 3 of those things as well. So I want to expand on supply chain, because if one thing has convinced me of how a free market system like ours really is very, very difficult to centralize governance of that, and some of my colleagues across the aisle want to do that. It is the supply chain. I did not realize how complex that was until I started getting into the food supply chain, and for instance, looking at the hogs and pork and how we distribute that. I don't know if you realize this, but hog production is a just-in-time. That's a just-in-time production. And so when we didn't have the ability to actually move from farm to market and through the entire supply chain, they were literally destroying or euthanizing hundreds of thousands of hogs, which was problematic. And we anticipate a down market increase in prices because of that, and maybe some scarcity. And they did the same thing with chickens and other areas. Eggs was one. Milk was another. So we have these fresh foods that we all love to have, but the supply chain is really complex, and so trying to organize that from a bureaucratic standpoint in Washington, D.C., I think would be incredibly detrimental. I think the market is so much more efficient at organizing the supply chains. So then you take me into China overall and what's going on there, and there's a lot to be said about China, and including supply chains and everything from humanitarian awareness of do we have U.S. companies that are actually tacitly obtaining goods from child slavery going on in China. I mean, these are things that all weigh into and other humanitarian issues, intellectual property theft, the leverage that China puts to stay in their markets, to big tech, and some of the issues that they have with China. All of that goes into a more broader discussion of how do you view China. And we have seen in Washington, D.C., and this is important, Glenn, for the audience to understand, that China is moving away in Americans' political elites' eyes away from a friendly economic competitor to an almost Cold War posture in some respects, where we are seeing it's become very bellicose in some ways from the Chinese side to ours. And this goes back to when I was a grad student. My history of looking at this goes back to before even when I was a grad student, looking at Northeast Asian security issues and China and its relationship. At that time, China was actually, they didn't have a blue water navy. They didn't have a middle class. They did not have the kind of advanced rocket telemetry that we have given. They didn't have, they were multiple generations behind us in technology. And we basically supplied everything I just said. We've supplied that to them. And they want to be a hegemon. I mean, they wanted to be a regional hegemon. They are a regional hegemon now. And I bring this up because you mentioned China and what's the relationship with China. What we're seeing in China right now, there's a boundary dispute, border dispute between India and China on India's northern border, China's southern border, that has actually been hot in some respects. And what you're seeing is India is looking to engage with other regional allies to maybe balance against China. And I think that's really what you're going to see is some of these regional neighbors will start balancing against China in the future. So we see a lot of movement there, and it really heated up, as you saw rhetorically over the last weekend when there was U.S. Military exercises in the South China Sea, which we call it the South China Sea, but don't forget that whereas you got Malaysia, that maritime area is 50 miles from Malaysia. It's international waters. China's coast is over 1,000 miles from that area, and so you see territorial maritime claims by China, which are longstanding, but those have been contested. And the U.S. position, the latest statement, which by the way, I missed that this morning. I had another Zoom call, but Pompeo is probably speaking as I'm speaking right now, and what he's going to talk about is the U.S. support for the international law claim by the Philippines that the Philippines won, and China has said they will not abide by it, and the U.S. has said we support the demand that they abide by it. So I'll leave it at that. We could go on China for forever, but those are some. I hope I covered at least those three areas that you mentioned.
You did, and I know Garrick wants me to toss it over to him for some audience questions, but if I could just have a quick follow-up, because my recollection is, I hope I'm not making this up, but do you speak Japanese?
I do speak Japanese.
Okay, so This is how my wife always says I shouldn't use sports analogies or things like this, but I look at it, there's two super teams right now. There's Team USA and there's Team China. And the things that we can do to increase the influence of the U.S. I think USMCA is part of it. Perhaps a trade agreement with the UK is part of it. And we have some good things that are already underway with the world's number 3 economy, Japan. Right. So just your thoughts in Congress of ways that the United States could increase its sphere of influence so that we're as strongly positioned as possible as this situation continues to roar.
Well, I would say with Japan, what I think is important is that the administration needs to have, in my opinion, a tighter relationship with Japan. And when I say that, because they need to engage with the Prime Minister and also the Diet of Japan. I had a chance, I can't remember when this was, it was a number of months ago, it was before the COVID, to meet with, I think, a good half a dozen or more members of the Japanese Diet. And they had all kinds of questions about why X, why. They were very critical, but when we said, but here's why, and we started bringing it up, they said, man, we wish we knew that. We wish, and that tells me that there's a lack of communication there that we need to cure. So with that's number one there.
Thank you, Congressman. Garrick?
Thanks, Congressman. Thanks, Glenn. We have a few questions coming through in the chat. So, Nicole, I'm going to ask you to take yourself off mute and open your camera. Congressman from Acronis SCS, Nicole Magny. Go ahead, Nicole.
Cool. Hi. Thanks, Garrick, and thanks, Congressman, for your time and your insight today. So my question is going back to the relief funding a little bit. So I'm curious, there's been discussions for many years now on providing more cybersecurity funding to state and local governments from the federal level. And I've heard some mentions of it, both with the NDAA as well as the next relief funding. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts or insight on those conversations and what, if anything, we can expect moving forward on that.
Well, thanks, Nicole. I think you're going to see something with regard to cybersecurity funds in one or the other of these, in this series of bills. There'll be a series of ostensibly 12 bills, and some of them will be combined. I've received word, at least from some of my sources in the administration, that they want some cybersecurity funding. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know how much, and I don't know how they want to distribute it. We're waiting to see more information on that, and those of you who served in Congress, you understand this. That's part of the problem. This is all being negotiated by leadership, and they're going to give us a 2,000-page bill and say, well, they're going to give it to us at midnight, and they're going to say, we're going to vote tomorrow morning at 9. And we're gonna try to get through it, and so I don't know where they are, but so my chief of staff, my new chief of staff, Kate Laborde, is on. Kate, let's just check and to see if we can find out what we're talking about as far as number and how they plan to distribute and what that might look like. But they've indicated that that's one of their priorities. I just don't know what that looks like, though. And I apologize, Nicole, for not having more information.
No, I appreciate that. And Kate, I appreciate any info you can pass along later. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Thanks, Nicole, for that question. Congressman, the next question we have is from Valley of the Sun United Way, Penny Alley Taylor. Penny, if you'll open up your mic and your camera, you're next up with Congressman Biggs.
Okay, well, I could open up my mic, but I can't open up my camera for some reason. But
that's okay.
Yeah. Hi, Congressman Biggs. Thank you so much for being on the call today. And of course, thank you to the Arizona Chamber for arranging this meeting. It's tremendous that we have this opportunity to talk with you directly. So one thing that I just wanted to bring to your attention is that you know, enhancing the charity's ability to raise private donations by expanding and making the new non-itemizer charitable deduction permanent would be a really wonderful tool for us. And I know that there's a temporary $300 non-itemizer provision, and that's a step in the right direction for us, of course, and we do appreciate that as a start, but you know, you're aware, and many others are, that donations have dropped off since there has been a change in the law, and especially as it relates to our faith-based friends and basic needs. And, you know, in this economy, we're being asked to be doing even more. You know, our churches are stepping up, the nonprofits are stepping up, we're all trying to do our best. But we know that tax policy does play a role in people making donations and their gifts. And it would be very helpful to have that non-itemized or deduction, if that could be expanded. And there are a number of bills out there that do that. And, you know, when Congress passed the income tax in 1913, the very first deduction they allowed for in 1917 was the charitable tax deduction, because Congress at that time felt that people should not have to pay taxes on the gifts they give to do the public good. So I know you're very familiar, and there is some legislation that's out there, and we would love to have your support around that in any way or shape that you would feel comfortable. So I just wanted to raise that, and thank you so much for all your work that you're doing back there. And I'll shut it down.
Well, thanks, Penny. And you're certainly right. I agree with you that a tax policy will have an impact on the recovery, but it'll also have an impact on giving, because people respond to incentives. I mean, that's just the nature of who we are. If there's a reward, and we with charitable giving, it has two incentives. It has both an affective incentive, which is that warmth and glow you feel when you're helping somebody else out, but it also has if you have a tax policy that favors and provides that incentive, you're going to get more of it. The economy being down is really put stretch on so many of our charitable organizations and religious institutions that are trying to help out there. So I'm all for providing that incentive. And right now, I'm not sure that the Ways and Means Committee is going to take any of those up as individual bills. I think that you might see something come together for a kind of an omnibus bill later on, and if so, that's going to be probably, I'd be surprised, it's not listed on any of the bills that we're going to be doing in the next two to 3 weeks. So I would imagine that if you're going to see that at all, it would be September, and if it didn't happen in September, it would not happen this year, but would be taken up in the next Congress. And I'm only telling you that so I can give you a true and accurate picture of it as well as I can. But I agree with you that I would like to see something, I would like to see expanded and made permanent.
Thanks, Penny, for that question, and thanks, Congressman. We only have a few minutes left with Congressman Biggs, and Kate, if I go over, you feel free to throw the flag and we'll shut this down. Congressman, the highway bill that we're operating under is about to expire at the end of the fiscal year, and as you know, the House adopted a bill that really doesn't have a chance in the Senate. And meanwhile, those of us who go to the pump, we send those gas tax dollars back to Washington. So any insight you can give us as to whether you think an infrastructure/highway bill gets done this year, or do you think we're going to have a few more extensions?
Well, I think I was talking to you guys maybe in January when I said if there's a bill that I think we're going to get out and do it fairly quickly, that would be bipartisan. It'll be a transportation and infrastructure bill. It looks like my crystal ball. Never trust me. I apparently don't have that crystal ball like I need. The reality is that the T&I bill that came out of the House is it's not going anywhere in the Senate, and the Senate wants to get something. But I'm going to tell you what I would suspect would happen. I would imagine you're going to get a scaled down extension of the current package sometime in September. That's what I would imagine.
Got it. Okay.
Now, hey, and don't forget, I'm the guy that said we would get a T&I bill out pretty quickly, because that's something we could all agree on. So
fair enough. Fair enough. It's noted, and it's a good thing we're recording this. So we have this on the historical record. Glenn, back to you to take us home.
Thank you, thank you, Garrick, and Congressman. Thank you for joining us with this very detailed update. And I want to thank you for making liability reform an important pillar of what you're doing to help bring the economy back. And whenever you mention, some of the policies that took us to the best economy probably this country has ever had, and I think of people like Larry Kudlow in the White House, the tax cuts and the regulatory reform worked extremely well, and we've made great progress on trade. We could get liability reform, and we could get this virus under control. This economy will come back. And I just want to thank you, Congressman, for your work, and I also appreciated your comments on the Paycheck Protection Program, because I do think the focus with the $130 billion or so remaining that expires in August 18th needs to be with the small businesses, as well as those sectors like restaurants and hotels and tourism that have just been walloped. So I would give you the floor for any final comments, but thank you for visiting with us today.
Well, thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Garrick, for putting this together. We really, I'm optimistic in some ways, because if we can just, if we can get people feel confident in going out again, and where government can kind of let us get back to who we are as a people, I think you're going to see the economy roar back, to be honest with you. I mean, when I talked about the foundation is there, and you're right, it is tax policy, it is regulatory policy, it is things like liability protection, and we've got a lot of big issues in this country to tackle, but it's so much easier when people feel that they have economic security. So like when Penny's talking about all the issues that people have moving to poverty or becoming unemployed, or the challenges, we can resolve those when we have an expanding economy. And that's why I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful. And just so you know, I don't want to make this partisan, but I will tell you that some of my colleagues across the aisle, the first thing they want to do is they want to eliminate the corporate tax structure that we put in place, that I think has been so successful, and that I think wasn't near enough, and I think we could do even more. And they want to reimpose some of the regulatory relief that we've given. And I'm very concerned that if that happens, that we prolong economic malaise, which will be very detrimental to this nation and the world, quite frankly. The world needs a healthy economically viable, strong U.S. for it to rebound as well. So with that, thanks for what you guys do, you ladies and gentlemen do, to make this community better and make Arizona a great state to live in, because it is the best state in the world to be in, I can tell you.
What a great way. That's an Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry statement. We're going to promote that. And Congressman, thank you for being with us, and we look forward to continuing the conversation as time goes by.
Yeah, thanks all.
All right, thanks, Congressman. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll post this online. We'll talk to you down the road.